How's it going, everybody? And welcome into another bonus edition of the Couch GMs podcast, where we recap the Couch GMs World Cup, our 4-year, 30-man fantasy football experience. I have a special guest joining me today, George Kurth. We're going to recap Week 14 and the wrap-up of the first season of the Couch GMs World Cup, at least the regular season. Still have playoffs to go. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But George, how are you doing?
I mean, I had to come on with you for the bonus episode to flex and give a preview for the new look in the background. Had to talk about my ridiculous Monday night comeback to get myself a bye in Group C. But it was a heck of a Week 14. I wasn't a fan of the two Monday night game thing like we were talking about, but it made for some interesting end of fantasy regular season scenarios for sure.
Kind of. I mean, the Packers-Giants game didn't have as big of an impact as what the Dolphins and Titans did. You talked about a wild Week 14. I know I mentioned this in one of our group chats with me, you, Tyler, and our good friend Kempy, friend of the show, also in the Couch Games World Cup. But heading into Week 14, 6 of the 8 teams that held the top 8 picks all won this past week, which would be the Giants, Bears, Patriots, Titans, and Jets. And the Giants are, I'm sorry, and the Giants Commanders, they didn't get a bye, but they were on bye, so they didn't win, but didn't lose either. So that was a fun little twist. And then Dolphins, Eagles, Lions, top teams in their divisions, and Chiefs, if you want to count them, all lost. What a wild week. And you mentioned your comeback in the World Cup, but that comeback made you pay your price in our League of Records. So that one to me, you can talk about which other one, but I want to know if anyone in the comments can beat this story. But George, take it away.
All right, so go into actually, if you listened to our regular show last week, there's a little bit of a preview of this where I said in our league of record, I could be as high as the 2 seed, as low as the 8 seed. Anyway, I went into Monday Night Football holding a bye in our league of record as I was winning and Kempy was losing. Friend of the show, Kempy. And in Monday night, I also needed 60 points in the World Cup from Saquon Barkley, DeAndre Hopkins, and Barkley Hopkins, and why am I missing on the third? Raheem Mostert. I don't know. I wasn't ready for this apparently. And if I won that, I beat Josh to get a bye in the World Cup. Comes down to the end of the Monday night game where Raheem Mostert knocks in 2 touchdowns in about 30 seconds, which then gives me the edge in the World Cup. So I end up getting a bye. But in that time, not only did I lose in our league of record, Kempy comes back to win, knocking me from 2 down to 3, then down to 7, and I missed the playoffs. So the fantasy gods giveth and the fantasy gods taketh away, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. And for the record, in the game where you weren't facing Kempe, you were facing the guy who was in 7th, and you
Yes.
had roughly a 15-point lead, and you had Tua left, and he
Mm-hmm.
had Raheem Mostert, and he came back and
Yes.
beat you by just because of
Not
basically.
even mentioning the, Tua tried to sneak for a touchdown. Tua tried to throw into the end zone 2 or 3 times. Like, there were chances that if one of those happened, as opposed to Mostert, it would have flipped on me. Maybe it would have been better for me if it happened the other way, as I would have been in the playoffs in our league of record and still been, I believe, the 4 seed in the World Cup playoffs. But I guess I'm throwing all my marbles into one basket, and I get a bye this week in the World Cup instead.
Alrighty, and that World Cup game you had was a doozy. So why don't we jump into our World Cup recap? Alrighty, and this is my friendly reminder. If you are on Spotify and just walking around the house, not driving, make sure you turn the video on and you can see all the stats and scores. If you're listening and you have the ability to jump over to YouTube, search us up at the Couch GMs, hit the subscribe button, and watch it on there. But we were just talking about George's matchup. So not only was this a close matchup, it was a matchup of the highest score and the second highest score. So we're going to go backwards today. We're going to start in Group C with this matchup that George mentioned. Finished at 148.74, and we'll scroll down and check out his stats and scores like we do. And that Raheem Mostert, 22 and a half points, thanks to 2 fourth quarter touchdowns, really helped put the game out there. And this is not the only game that came down to something happening across the World Cup in those 3 weeks, or in those two games. And you mentioned Saquon Barkley. He had the big run. He also had that silly fumble where he kind of fell and fumbled and almost gave the Packers a chance to win the game. DeAndre Hopkins has been playing really well with Will Levis. So really solid week there to go in 148 victory to 145, the two highest scores. And basically the winner of this game got the bye. So you guys started out the Couch GMs World Cup uh, playoff mode mentality to start. Any thoughts you want to give on this game in particular?
Well, first off, take a look at that chart really quick. Look at that spike at the very end of Monday Night Football. That had to be heartbreaking for Josh to just see that what looks like would have been 20-ish point lead fade away in the fourth quarter. That doesn't happen too often. So I would love to hear if you have any Monday night miracles that you had. Drop them in the comments, or even heartbreaks, whatever. I personally have been on here before and said I don't love Josh's team because I don't like his depth. But now you're in the fantasy playoffs. There's no buys anymore. He has a tough team. I knew this was going to be an uphill battle. If you don't mind scrolling down for me, Cody, just so I can see that roster a little bit. Who am I trying to see? Deebo Samuel coming on in the last few weeks has been huge. He had 30 points. Joe Mixon, despite the quarterback change, has actually been better than he was with Joe Burrow most of the season. Like, he's got some weapons on that side. So even though he does fall to the 4th seed and have to play next week, he is a contender in Group C for sure. On my side, I mean, dealing with some tight end troubles because of losing Mark Andrews, still trying to find a perfect spot to fit in there. But I like where I'm at, and I like the fact that I only have to play 2 games to win this instead of 3. But
Yeah, and then just some for insider information on this matchup. George sent a picture in our group chat. Uh, Near the end, there's about 3 minutes left of the 4 o'clock window, uh, and he was losing 140.34 to 52.9. So, talk about a comeback. But we got a lot more games to get into. Let's jump into the next matchup. This one not as close, but Brandon took care of business, locking up the number 1 seed, 134.26 to Coleman 61.46. Now, George, when you see that score, how many players do you think are inactive on his lineup?
I would think 2.
Well, the answer is zero. He played a full
Oh,
lineup.
man. Oh,
Uh,
there's the Gabe Davis donut. There we go.
Gabe Davis did have a donut, so basically like playing inactive. Dallas Goedert only 5 points in his return. The Steelers defense putting up only 5 points in their loss against the Patriots to kick it off. Dameon
That was a
Pierce
better
one.
Thursday game than we expected, at least.
That is true. Hopefully this way can be the same, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Before we get out of here, Russell Wilson, 15 points. Not a bad day. Josh Jacobs getting hurt. That could have big implications for the fantasy playoffs coming up, especially with the short week for them. Like I mentioned, we'll talk about the Thursday night game before we get out of here. But 134 points, that's no slouch. And if you look at his team, I think the biggest surprise is the Zeke Elliott. That Thursday night game we're talking about. Ramondre Stevenson's down.
Yeah.
Zeke was pretty readily available. A lot of people saw him as a quote unquote valuable backup. And we talked about in the last episode of the actual podcast how last year it was Jerick McKinnon. He came on at the end of the season, really helped be a catalyst for a lot of championship teams were able to pick him up. Zeke might be that guy this year. I know it's one game, so I'm not going to super overreact. But depending on how long Ramondre Stevenson's out, if he can still do, even if he gets 15 points the rest of the way, like that's a solid RB2 option that was sitting out on waivers heading into the playoffs for a lot of teams. So that's a guy we'll have to take a look at. Mike Evans definitely disappointing with that. Didn't hurt Brandon at all. And then bench wise, I mean, there's nothing you can do when you lose by 70. Uh, but that's what their benches did. Any notes? Anything you want to add to this one?
No, I'm glad to see that Coleman fought it all the way through. Brandon gets the other bye. So you're going to see me and Brandon in 2 weeks. Not much else to add there.
Perfect. And if you ever want to jump in, I'm so used to doing the show by myself and just rolling right through it. Feel free to cut me off. I know being remote recording is not always the smoothest with the interruptions, but People want to know what they want to, or people are here to see what, and the NFL website has been awful all day. It just does never wants to load. So I'm going to read the score and then I'm going to have to refresh the page here. But our third matchup is Anthony, if I remember correctly, of Cincinnati's owned, took on Jason of Waddle Over the Hill, and Anthony got a victory 84.50 to 72.62. So we've seen teams score 140, 148, 134 for victories. Now Anthony's like, I'm going to get a victory with 84 and a half points. And that's actually a big win for Anthony as he picked up another win if this page ever wants to load. And I believe he moved to 3-11 on the season. And you might ask,
Yes, sir.
why is that even important? Well, this is a 4-year experience, so 3 years to qualify for the final matchup, and every win counts. And at the end of this, we'll show you how each score is, or how each team is doing, and all that good stuff. Let's see if I can get up the next matchup. And all right, so this one we can get popped up. I don't know why we couldn't get the score. I'll try again here. One quick click over. All right, they don't want us to see Anthony's and Jason's breakdown, but no, Anthony got the victory, 84.5 to 72.62. This matchup, though,
For the 6th seed, too, just noting.
yes, for the 6th seed, came down to a difference of 0.26. 97.32 to 97.58. Jim gets the victory over David and get that final playoff spot. And it's not as drastic as you, but look at this little spike. It's not as drastic as your matchup, but there is definitely a little spike here. So let's take a look at these lineups. And I mean, there is so much back and forth here. Now, it doesn't look like this one actually came down to Monday night when I'm looking at it, but it came down to Sunday night. And Jalen Hurts.
Oh, man. That had to be garbage time something to be that close with Jalen Hurts there. Down 33-13. That's absolutely crazy. Not his best game, only 8.88, but literally just enough to get Jim into the playoffs.
And
That's close.
What has to be even more heartbreaking is, I guess, because we can't quite see it here, but that line doesn't quite overtake. So the spike was actually AJ Dillon, who put up
Oh, that is Monday night. Yep.
88 points, but it didn't eclipse uh
Packers defense too. Giants late touchdown.
Defense. You're right. The Giants late touchdown, or it was actually probably the field goal to win the game.
Yeah,
Probably,
actually.
Gave them enough points. Incredible game. Let's take a look at the bench. Is there any big misses on here? So I see Baker Mayfield with 20 points, but he started Justin Field for 24. So that's not a big miss there. Tyler Lockett with 11. I mean, over Devonta Smith.
Double
I mean,
tight end.
he did go double tight end. That kind of backfired on him in that miserable 3-0 game, but 7.8 points.
Justin Jefferson's injury is really what did it. And I mean, I was thinking about how many teams were still in playoff contention with Justin Jefferson sitting on the IR for so long. Obviously, one of those situations here. Gets 2 catches, ends up getting injured, going to the hospital. Thankfully, it sounds like he's okay and he just has some kind of rib bruise. But that would have been the difference, 100%. There's no way he scored 3.7 on a half of a drive and would not have put him over the edge there.
Yeah, for sure. And that's tough because you thought you were going to get your guy back, and no one blames you for playing Justin Jefferson, and it didn't work out there. So tough one for Dave. And we'll have to remember this, as like we mentioned, if these two come down to, competing for a final wild card spot in year 4, we'll have to remember this game. Last matchup here, another blowout, a 50-point victory. And again, the NFL website is going so slow. But I'll just read you the scores and we'll probably move on and not recap the game so much. But Doug of Country Road takes Mahomes 140.54 to Bryn Decent Exposure, aka Mikey B, 90.24. So 50-point game. Uh, I can't remember. I honestly can't remember everybody's team off the top of my head. So Doug, great win. But let's take a look. Hopefully, this at least loads.
Mhm.
So the playoffs are set. Like George mentioned, Brandon and himself have a bye. Doug will play Jim this week, and then Nick, Josh. Which one is
Josh.
it? Josh. I always
Josh.
get them so confused. And Jason play this week. So uh, Jason was able to, I believe, lose and still get in, which is good. But here are the final standings of regular season, how it broke down in Group C. It was Brandon at 1, George at 2. Obviously, you know the rest of them before mentioned it. David getting the 7th seed by less than half a point. Mikey B, um, he was like the 1 seed back in like week 6. He had a really rough stretch down the stretch, I guess is the best way to say that. And he got the 8th seed. Cole got the 9th seed, and then Anthony got the win, but still finished at 3-11 on the season. George, this is your group. So any last words before we head into the playoffs and move on to the next group?
I'm excited to see how this group turns out. I already mentioned how I thought Josh's team was a force because I didn't like his depth, but I like his starting lineup. And Doug's been that guy that's been hanging around there most of the year. Like you mentioned back near the beginning when Mikey B was near the top, Doug was the other guy that was up there. He kind of fell off for a couple of weeks, but he never fell below 4th or 5th. He had a shot at a bye, but the only thing that was hurting him was Josh and myself playing. So there was going to be a points issue with him, with one of us getting a win. But he's another force to be reckoned with. So I don't want to count anybody out. We know how the fantasy playoffs are unpredictable, but I mean, this league is 4 or 5 teams deep. So we're going to have to see how it works out for the next few weeks.
Alrighty. Let's jump, since we're going backwards, we'll jump over to Group B. We'll go into the game center here, and we'll talk about another close one. A pretty
Man.
sad close one. But I took the loss on Monday night. Uh, I don't know.
Live
Uh,
recording at its
yep,
finest.
that's what happens when you live in your parents' basement. Sometimes they ask where the dog is. But anyways, I lost 71.14 to 71.52. So this is now my 3rd time in 5 weeks losing by less than 2 points.
Getting the bad luck out of the way before the playoffs, though.
Luckily, though, I was still able to squeak into the playoffs as the 6th seed. So I was 6-2 at one point, highest scorer in the league. Finished 7-7. Still was able to make the playoffs on my strong start. But let's take a look at this matchup here. And again, when both teams are putting up less than 72 points, like it's not going to be a great week. So we're going to see a lot of low numbers here. I think the CJ Stroud one is the big one. Yes, the Jets were a good defense. Maybe we should have taken into account the poor weather conditions in New Jersey that day. But him only getting 3.64 and then leaving with concussion symptoms was not what a lot of people were expecting. Zach Moss continues to not be the guy that he was the first time Jonathan Taylor missed time. Jamar Chase had a rough week after his big game with Jake Browning last week. AJ Brown didn't quite get it done. The Packers defense, another one that field goal probably cost me just enough. So tough week there. Congrats to Hayden on this one. Saquon Barkley. So his 21 points helped him get the victory. This was another one, like, didn't look good, but I had basically a 20-point lead going into the game and didn't quite pull it out. So that was a tough. Anyone on the bench really stick out? Yeah, there it is. Brees Hall, Isaiah Likely, both
Yeah.
on my bench
Mm.
there. Brees Hall, if
On the other
go ahead.
side, trying to play Josh Dobbs over Trevor Lawrence, like I think that's getting a little cute.
I mean, so not knowing Hayden's situation, like sometimes you have to depending on work-life balance, like Trevor Lawrence was a true game time decision.
That's true.
So maybe he wasn't able to, and he had to pick beforehand to see if he was able to go. I completely get what you're saying about being a little cute there. That one would have helped on my side. Not playing Brees Hall after saying just play Brees Hall every week, and then decided to not play him for Zach Moss this week. Yeah, that one's going to hurt. Isaiah Likely, uh, not playing the best, but looking pretty good for the fantasy playoffs at tight end. So that would be beneficial. Alrighty, next matchup. If it loads, it does. Marcus also finishes 7-7 on the season, 84.88 to Shelby, 124.32. Shelby locked in one of the buys last week and continued to win this week. Here, I'll bring down the scores here and let you see if any names stick out to you. We've talked about Mike Evans and his poor performance, but any other names stick out to you?
Props to her for throwing in Zeke there as well. A lot of 20s, which is good to see. Josh Allen, Zeke, Rashad White, Cooper Kupp making the comeback. The Cup side down really coming back together here right before the fantasy playoffs. We'll see what she has on the bench to replace like a Brandon Cooks, who I think was a matchup play and such. But I mean, what we got here? James Conner on bye. That's already a pretty solid fill in there. You got Wicks down there who might have a couple of games for Green Bay, but I think Connor's probably the immediate plug and play at this moment. So
Wicks
that's
is
still a
probably
solid
headed
guy
to
to go in.
IR. So he was
Oh,
a hot waiver wire. He banged up his ankle on Monday night, so he's probably had it. They have not
I'm not
confirmed the
through my
temperature.
normal podcast prep before we go into this one, so it's a little bit.
Yeah, it's all good. That's why this is the bonus episode and not the official episode, because we do stuff on the fly here. Congrats to Shelby, big win. Marcus making the playoffs.
That was his worst week in a while. He's still the top scorer in this league, I think. So
He still is the
still a
top scorer.
force to be reckoned with, but maybe cooling off a little bit at the wrong time.
So I don't know. Maybe it's just this third matchup. It just doesn't want to load. But the third matchup is your fiance, 129.54 to beat Neil, which thank you. I definitely needed her to beat Neil because Neil actually has more points than I do, but I have one game up on him, and that was the difference maker between 6 and 7. So his down week did me a bunch of favors. Bree not only clinched the number 1 seed here, but clinched the top seed of all 30 teams in the Couch GMs World Cup with her 12-2 record. So incredible start for her. But that does not mean anything if she does not win the championship this year and has some 2 bad years. So this is a lot of shift is going to happen on the overall standings. And because of the NFL website, I don't know if you've had issues with it. I've been doing some stuff on it all day. For a while, it had me in another league as the 2 seed playing this week against
Oh.
and the 3 seed getting the bye. And I was like, excuse me, what? So that's not the World Cup, so I won't confuse anybody here. The next matchup is Reed versus Josh. Josh lost 113.96 to 145.64. Fun fact, Josh, of all 30 people, only person to finish 4-10.
Interesting.
Just a random fun fact there for you. Do with that as you please. Reed's another team that's been coming on strong as late. You mentioned Joe Mixon continuing to be better with Jake Browning, put up more consistent points. Debo Samuel coming on strong. Austin Eckler had a decent day despite the poor performance, which is weird because they were like, oh, he's going to start splitting carries with, it's going to be more running back by committee. And then he has his best day in fantasy. So that was an interesting before game. DeAndre
The
Hopkins.
Chargers, I think, learned really quickly that they're a more dynamic offense with Austin Eckler on the field. So, like, I'm not taking too much of that running back by committee by heart, seeing that they just looked better with him on the field. And I mean, they obviously didn't look great in general and now lost a quarterback, but it's.
Yeah. And then you mentioned too cute.
Mhm.
And typically we talk about this stuff on the regular podcast, but since we can bring them up here, I'm gonna pick on Patrick, not pick on Patrick Mahomes. I'm gonna ask you a question about him if it'll let me load up his stats. But I think we're now like 4 or 5 weeks with him sub 20 as a quarterback now.
Interesting.
Uh,
I'll read them off for you if I can get it up here on my mobile device.
or we're just gonna table this discussion for Thursday. And I wanted to get your thoughts on him as a quarterback. Is he
So,
is
I mean,
Pat
last 5 weeks, let's take it back to week 9, 15, 16, 20, 13, 13. Biggest thing to look at, though, like, he hasn't been super, like, blow you out of the water all year, and he's still quarterback 7. I think it stinks because you drafted him so early, and you have the early quarterback expectations, but it's not necessarily like he's playing bad in terms of the position in fantasy. So I don't think you get cute and try to sit Mahomes, but he's not the person that's carrying your team the way that you hoped when you drafted him in the second, third round.
cool? And then on Josh's side, this is one of his better weeks. It sucks that he wasn't able to pull out a victory. Nice to see Garrett Wilson have a bounce back week with 15. Raheem Mostert did not quite have a miracle to separate or close in this gap. Bench wise, Hunter Henry had a nice day on the bench, but he has been so inconsistent. Don't blame him for starting Pat Freiermuth, but that had to stink on Thursday night when that game was over. One more matchup to highlight here, real quick. And again, the NFL site does not want to let me show you the whole score, but Aaron, Levan, uh, Levin, whatever we call them in this, another team that was at the end. He was struggled all season. He's got some wins under his belt to end out the season, and he's going to finish in 11 as well. And he was the team that went along without winning. So props to him to keep working the waiver wires, get some victories because those will matter as we progress through the World Cup. And he got the victory 123.24 to 106 even over Sheeler. So those were the matchups for week 14. Let's see how the playoffs break down. Like we mentioned, Bree and Shelby, the two ladies of the World Cup, sitting on top and getting a bye this week. I will get to play Reed and his team that is coming on strong in the first round as the 6th seed, and he's the 3 seed. And then Hayden, who did beat me, got to play Marcus. But you mentioned it. If we come over to the standings here and go to buy points for, Marcus is still the highest scorer by about 60 points, which is impressive for a 7-7 team compared to a 12-2 team. And then Bree is second, and Reed is third. Shelby's 4. Neil, who just missed, is 5, and then I'm at 6, and then Hayden is actually all the way down at 8. So I think there's 4 teams with a realistic shot, and I think that's Marcus, Reed, Shelby, and Bree. Basically, because I just played Hayden, we both put up 71 points. Maybe that's why. Maybe I don't want to sound too cocky, but I think those are the best shots here. But like you mentioned, anything is possible when you're talking fantasy football. Anything about this uh, league you want to hit on quick? I know I've been talking for a while, so or do you want to jump into the next one?
Shout out to Neil, who said, if I'm not going to win this league, I want the 2 girls on top. And he decided to not make the playoffs, and the 2 girls are on top. So um, I'm interested to see how this one breaks down. And I'm also interested to see how, if you or Hayden can make that upset this week to knock out Reed and Marcus, because I do think that those 2 are 2 of the stronger players in the league. And then we'll see what happens when Bree and Shelby come back next week.
Yeah, I'm just gonna. Marcus is the team that really concerns me, and I know he didn't get the win this week, but he
Which
has
is
a.
weird because we've been talking about Marcus as like a favorite for a while, and now all of a sudden it's like snap of a finger. We're concerned.
Well, I'm not really concerned about him with that 84 points because his depth has been pretty good. Like he had Tony Pollard on the bench this week. He had a decent game that was scored him more points. Jalen Hurts, he's going to bounce back. They've just gone through a gauntlet here, but their schedule lightens up and they're gonna get back to form. Kyron Williams, Keenan Allen, that one might hurt the most with the loss of
Mm-hmm.
but Keenan Allen is such a reliable target. Like he still might see 12 targets a game from Easton Stick and be just fine fantasy
He
wise.
actually
So
still saw 12 targets this week, and I think 10 of them were from Easton Stick. So,
yeah, so
yeah, I
not
mean,
too.
targets wise, he just might not do as much with the targets, but he's still going to get the opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah, and now that so I like Marcus's team, and the only reason I went directly to his team was because it didn't load the first time. But let's jump into Group A real quick. Run through these matchups. We'll start with the first one, which is Tyler. Uh, Tyler versus Tyler. So we're gonna the Tyler Bowl. Uh, did not do well for Tyler S. Did well for Tyler K. Kempy, the other Tyler, 116.32 to 87.74. Not a great game. Tyler, though, was lucky enough. He'll still make the playoffs based on points. He had a big enough points lead. And points is a very interesting one when we talk about this league. So pay attention to that when we come in a little bit later. Taysom Hill with a goose egg at the tight end position does not help. So putting up 80 points when you have Debo and Christian McCaffrey score 45, like that's just a rough week all around. And so 3 for 3 in people starting Zeke in the World Cup. That's why this is a tough, or this is a great experience. A lot of competitive people know what they're doing, and it should make a multi-year tournament competition for sure. And was able to survive without Justin Jefferson. So shout out to Kempy for not only winning this week with the without Justin Jefferson, finishing as the number 1 seed on the season without Justin Jefferson. So that's his. I can't remember back, and there were so many drafts. He went at least top 3. He's probably the number one
I think
pick.
he
I think
went
that was
first
consistent.
I think he went
I
first in every league.
I think that was the same thing too. But first, so lose your number 1 overall pick and still put together a good enough team. Uh, Props to him on that.
I'd have to go through and do like a case study on like all of my leagues to see where the Justin Jefferson owners fell. But I will make a bet that he's the only one that was the 1 seed. And I feel like he might be the only one that I saw that ended up being a top 4 seed.
Excuse me, yes, sir. In Pee Wee, number 2 seed.
Oh, Justin Jefferson owners at 2. See, that I didn't do enough homework on this. I was not prepared, but I'm surprised with that one.
Yeah,
Anyone that did take their number 1 pick basically out of their lineup for half the year and finished with a bye. Number 1 is scary for the playoffs. And I know we've talked a lot about Greg in this league and a lot about how many points he's been putting up, but Kempy is scary getting back a number 1 weapon.
yeah. The question is, when does he come back? Does he play this week? Does he play? He doesn't need him this week, so
No,
that's
he
because
doesn't.
he got the bye.
Exactly.
It's does he play next week? Those are the questions we'll have to mention. And we
And
have some fun.
Minnesota's still in a playoff chase, so they're still going to try to bring back Justin Jefferson. It's not like, oh, now he's going to sit the rest of the year.
Yeah, but how will that change now that he'll be on his 3rd quarterback? It's since they're planning to start Nick Mullins. All the fun stuff we'll have to break down in the coming weeks. But you mentioned Greg, so let's jump around. Unlike traditional, Greg might have had his worst week of the season with 94.7 points, taking the loss to Nick, who will now finish as the 9 seed, giving up.
Timeout. I know you're going to talk about that. A 9 seed is 6 and 8.
Yes.
I can't wait to see these standings. Keep going.
Spoiler alert: 5 through 9, 6 and 8. I told you points were a big factor in this league, and that is exactly why. Greg takes the loss here. The loss causes him to lose the number 1 seed. He moves to the number 2 seed. But we'll check out his team as well. You know, Brandon Cooks, a lot of people were starting him in the high scoring game. He was a 1 yard short from double digits. If he would have just caught, if his knee wasn't down, he would have been in the end zone. But that's fantasy football at its finest. Greg's side, some disappointing weeks from Najee Harris. Tyreek Hill, that's going to be one to monitor. He did come back for a little bit. But he wasn't in there in their crucial before down or drive before Titans took the lead. They held him out of that one. He's reportedly day to day, but Tyreek Hill has been a big factor for a lot of people. So even if he becomes limited and sees a lot of production, it could shake up the fantasy playoffs as we move forward, not just in the World Cup, but across all of our leagues here. He does have a pretty good bench. He had Jaden Reed on the bench. The Cowboys defense should have just started them. Wouldn't have been just that wouldn't have been enough, but that would have brought him a little bit closer. He played Jaden Reed over somebody, also another double quarter tight end. So we've seen that now for at least two teams. So tough one there, but Greg gets the other bye. So I think he's okay taking a loss this week because he still has a bye. Next
Has a
week,
week to have Tyreek Hill recover, as well as Breeze, the owner in Group B. So she also has a week to have Tyreek Hill recover. So good to know
and
there.
I think Brandon might have him in your group.
I can double check that while you move on, because that is a great point. That even though we are dealing with the injury to Tyreek Hill, it may not matter in the World Cup because he's on bye. Let's find out really
Uh,
quick.
while you
You
look that up,
are
I'll talk.
incorrect.
Oh, I'm not incorrect. Okay. See, that's why I can't remember it. But while he figure out who has him, I'll talk about the next matchup, which is Colin, who is the 7th seed at 6-8. 108.30 victory over Ryan, who's the 10 seed at 3-11, 90.08. Let's take a look at Colin's uh, team. And the first thing I notice is Stephon Diggs, 4.4 points in the win against Kansas City. That's a tough one. Tua, 9 points. That's a tough one. Other than that, Zach Moss, 7.6. We talked about that. But then I see DeAndre Hopkins on the bench and play him over Zach Moss. Yeah, he still wins the game, but he makes the playoffs. That's how close the points were in this one. The 6 and 7 seed came down to 4 points. So
Yeah.
one move like that. So I'm not talking so much this matchup specifically, but overall standings. If you would have made 4 points on the next matchup, because he improved on 10, because the next matchup is Cam versus 140.04 victory over Chaos Reigns, 98.74. Of course, the middle matchup, the NFL doesn't want to load for some reason. But that matchup, Cam is the 8th seed and missed out by 20 or so points. We'll look at that here in a second. But Andrew of Chaos Reigns is on a 5-game losing streak, weeks into the playoffs by 4 points. So incredible numbers there. And then the other,
I have to stop you for 1 second because that's Andrew T, not Andrew S, first off, and you keep mixing the two up, so I had to tease you for that. And number two, the amount of times that we've heard Andrew T in DMs in the World Cup group on Facebook roasting Derrick Henry for just being inconsistent this year and everything. He gets in by 4 points thanks to Derrick Henry having a solid game on Monday night. So he takes it all back, he says. And he's just going to let Derrick Henry do his work and hope that there's snow in Vermont during the playoffs.
all righty. Well, thank you for clarifying that, because I completely forgot he even had Derrick Henry. Oh, it loaded. So that's
Hey,
17 points. The 0 points from Noah Brown. So literally that last touchdown, literally the go-ahead touchdown with less than 2 minutes, got
gives him the
him,
points, even though
gave
it
him the
didn't give him the
points,
game.
but didn't give him the game. So that is, imagine that in fantasy football, enough points to still lose but make the playoffs, and that is exactly what happened. And that's why some people are probably in the comments right now. This is why you do head-to-head records first, not points for first. But we had to do points for in this league specifically because they're not just competing against the 9 other people in their group. They're competing against 29 other people across 3 groups. And points for is the only way to consistently have a fair and even tie breaker. Last matchup though is the other Andrew of the Memphis Pharaohs, and I've already forgot which one is S and T. I'm just kidding. The Pharaohs is
That one's
S,
S.
and Sean of That's Chunky, uh, 126.40 to 76.14. NFL doesn't want to load, but I'll give you a secret. They both made the playoffs. So we had the Tylers last week, which means this week in the playoffs we have the Andrews. The
The
three
Andrew
and
Bowl's coming.
the 3-6 team will be facing off this week, and then I no longer have to clarify which one is which. Just say Andrew won, and Andrew plays this week. That is basically how it works. At least in my head, Sean will play Tyler. So shout out to the host of the tournament, 3 for 3 in making the playoffs in year one. That's always a good thing. Greg falls to the 2 seed. Kempy gets the 1 seed. But here it is: 6-8, 6-8, 6-8, 6-8, 6-8, 2 through 9. Uh, a 4 point difference. Not even a full 4 points, like 3.9 something. Uh, the 8 seed was about 32 points behind, and then the 9 seed is of the playoffs would be 130 points. So if he would have made a comeback, that would have been a comeback for the ages. So a couple weeks ago, this group was not looking all that exciting. It looked like it had some clear guys at the top and a bunch of guys at the bottom, and ends up being our closest group of the weekend. You all thought I started with Group C because George was on. I had to save the closest group for last. Group B is still the best group. So that's all I got.
Okay.
Anything you want to add about Group A?
So no, I mean, again, I completely think that it's Greg and Kempy's group to lose, but there's some teams in here that are kind of scary coming through. Like, I think Tyler's kind of been on the upswing, so he's got a little bit of, bite to him. He's going to be somebody who's not going to go out easy. And Andrew S has had a pretty good season, even though he hasn't ever really been in a buy spot because it's just been Kempy and Greg pacing the whole entire group. He's somebody that's not going to go down easy either. So we'll see how it goes with all 6. But again, I think there is an easy way to say 4 people have a good shot, and we'll see if anyone else sneaks in.
Yeah, and you mentioned the top 4 teams in points scoring. But just to highlight, I know to reiterate how good of a season Greg is, he's the number 2 seed, and he scored 290 more points than Kempy, who is the number 1 seed. He
Sometimes
scored,
it's luck, but I mean, this is the reason why we've been hyping him up all year because he's the leader in all of the World Cup
yeah.
groups in points.
So he doesn't have the best record, but he is the overall points leader. So I'm going to pull off and I mentioned I would show uh, the overall standings. So I will
I
do
can
that.
jump in
Just
and talk a little bit of playoffs while you pull that up because worth noting, I don't know if a lot of you guys do this in your fantasy leagues. It doesn't always make a difference, but our playoffs show in bracket format. We always run our leagues in reseed. So similar to the way the NFL does, where the top seed will always play the lowest remaining seed. Obviously, only matters in week 2 of the playoffs in fantasy, with it only being a 16 playoff, but it does not always fall into bracket style. Sometimes there is a little bit of a change where maybe that 1 seed that can be stole from Greg could mean an easier matchup if a 6 seed squeaks through.
and that is what we're doing here. If I remember correctly. So I appreciate
Yes.
the. Here it is, and then just a real quick peek at the overall standings. I will zoom it in if my computer will let me. You're like, you are doing too much on your computer right now.
Right underneath the format button, there's a
I was trying
100%.
to do the pinch mode, so you can see. Uh, if you haven't been following along, like, why do you keep talking about this 4 year 3? So how it's going to work is over this year, next year, and the year after that, all the data will go in, and then the top 10 teams will eventually be in the championship cup, and the other 20 will randomly be selected into the 2 other uh, consolation brackets, basically. And so, if the season ended today, and it is, I believe we decided on, we're going to keep it to regular season win percentage only, with the
Yep.
exception that a championship is an automatic qualifier.
You mean a championship?
A championship. Oh, I forgot to change that.
Championship.
Yeah, I left it on just for you. So, hey, I think it's how we're going to get away from any trademarks or anything like that. So, win the
Okay,
championship.
sure.
But Bree would have the number 1 seed, and this also determines not the draft order, but you get to pick your draft order too in that final year for these 10 teams, where it's a random generator 30 minutes before for the any other time we're drafting in this league. So it has some power, but it would be Bree, then Kempy, then Greg, then Brandon, Shelby, George, Andrew S, Doug, Josh S, and Reed round out the top 10 as we speak. So as you can see, 8 and 6 would be good enough to qualify this year, but we have to do points different or points for as the overall as the tiebreaker. So it's win percentage, then points for, and then championship ones. Winning the championship is the automatic qualifier. So we're going to get uh, at most 9 automatic qualifiers if there's a new championship in each group every year, and only one wild card spot. But if somebody wins multiple championships, then we'll open up more wild card spots. That's kind of an overview of the Couch GMs World Cup. George, I know we still have the playoffs, but since you're on, I did want to ask overall thoughts on the first year of this experiment. What did you like the most? What are you most excited about moving forward?
I think the biggest thing that I like is you're not just competing against the 9 other people. You're also kind of looking forward towards the next 2 years and at the other 20. It's like these teams that did have 3, 4 wins near the end of the season, still trying to get a win because you never know if you have a good year, you could put yourself back in position for a wild card, even if you can't win a championship. Winning a championship in year one lets you be able to sit back and try to, obviously win another one, get a couple of bucks in your pocket, but get yourself into a power position for the actual World Cup final. And I don't think that year one really showed exactly how this is going to be near the end, because obviously year one you're just trying to see where you kind of position yourself. But like by end of year 2, year 3, teams are going to start getting desperate on like, I need to make the big move to get the championship. I need to make this move to try to get this one win to set myself into a chance at a wild card, that kind of thing. So like keep tuning in as this gets closer to the World Cup final cutoff, because this year's just the appetizer. It's going to start getting dicey as we get into the end of year 2 and into year 3, when these teams are like, this is my last chance to make it into the final. But that doesn't mean the playoffs this year aren't going to be exciting either, because getting that berth in year 1 is going to be really big for 3 guys or
Yeah,
gals.
definitely for sure. And I'm most interested to see like so using your fiance, you just mentioned the gals. She finished 12-2. If she misses the playoff, like let's say she loses in the championship round
Mm-hmm.
and has 2 rough seasons to follow it, could she fall all the way out of the qualifier? Like, does one good season get you in? Do you need to be? Is it better to be 8-6 3 years in a row, even if that doesn't mean always making the playoffs? I think those are the fun questions we'll have to answer, and we'll be doing these bonus episodes throughout the fantasy regular seasons every year we're doing this. And heck, if you guys like it, maybe we'll grow the number in the second iteration of the Couch GMs World Cup. But before we get out of here, that is the World Cup recap for week 14 as we head into the playoffs. Let's preview in the shortest TNF preview ever Thursday night football. All right, so I said it's going to be the shortest, but I've definitely done shorter this one because I think there's a lot to actually talk about in this game. I know we used at the top of the show, but there are 2 big injuries, one on both sides. Justin Herbert hurt his finger. He's been dealing with a finger injury before, but because of where they're at now, the re-injury, he is going to get surgery, putting him out for the season.
It was
Uh,
also not his throwing hand before. This one is.
that is correct as well. Thank you for the clarification.
Yep.
So Justin Herbert is yet another quarterback that we've lost to injury to add to the list of Joe Burrow, Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins. The list goes on. the quarterbacks that we are losing, uh, and making the playoffs even more interesting. And a lot of people are going to start Nick Mullins or have to play Zach Wilson just because the quarterback market is evaporating quickly. And then on the other side with the Raiders are, what am I trying to say? Not Justin. Why do I want to say Justin? Josh Jacobs injured his quad. We don't know the severity of how many weeks he will miss, but it is high likely that he will miss Thursday because of the injury and being a short week, which could be detrimental to some of these teams because he was having a pretty good season despite the Raiders not. I believe he's top 5 in rushing yards. Like he's top 5 in usage for running backs. Like he's been a solid, reliable option, and some of these teams are not going to have Josh Jacobs this week. Um, which one you want to start with, Chargers or uh, Raiders?
Let's start with Chargers because I think there's a couple of
Because they're
more
your favorite team.
weapons, at least typically. I
You
mean,
set
just
yourself up
stay
for that one,
tuned.
buddy.
Stay tuned for Thursday. You got a little treat coming in. Um,
I know what it is,
anyway,
and it's definitely worth the watch.
should say Friday morning. We record on Thursdays, my bad. But Friday morning, check out for when that podcast drops. But there's a couple more guys on that team typically that we would play. We talked about Keenan Allen probably still getting the targets, even though they're going to be an Easton stick at quarterback. So Keenan Allen's good to go. Austin Eckler may see a bit of a boost if they really do realize that they're better and more dynamic on offense with him on the field because they're going to want to hand the ball off more and get a little bit of pressure off the back of quarterback. After that, I didn't really love a lot of their weapons anyway. We're taking Gerald Everett out of the bucket. We're not playing Quentin Johnston, who's probably been the most disappointing of the high-end rookie wide receivers this year. So I think it is pretty basic, but losing Justin Herbert stinks. You can ask Cody. I actually had Herbert and Jacobs in the Dynasty League. Now I get to go in the first round of the playoffs down 2 starters. It's a great time.
Hey, in my another league I'm in, it's a double flex league. And I missed the playoffs because of the Monday night fiasco, which I'm kind of glad that I did, which you'll never hear me say, but it's a double flex league. And I started the season with Anthony Richardson, Aaron Rodgers. That didn't I started the season with Anthony Richardson, Aaron Rodgers, Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert continued to do well. And then I lost him, and I would have been my fourth quarterback I would have lost in a double flex league, which means there's no one on the waiver wire. So if you're in that situation, I do sympathize with you, and just know I didn't even make the playoffs in that league. But you mentioned Keenan Allen. I will note he did not practice on Monday or Tuesday with the heel injury, but I still expect him to go, and they're just resting him because he doesn't need to practice to play. And you mentioned Quentin Johnson, but Josh Palmer was activated off IR as a part of the transaction moving Herbert to IR. So he's a guy that, not saying you'd play this week, but maybe keep a name out there, or maybe depending on how your waivers go, maybe pick him up this week, put on your bench. And if he has a really good game with Easton Stick and looks like he might be the guy that he's going to target, you have him. If he has a dud game, you can cut him for someone else on the Sunday slate or the Saturday slate because we have Saturday games this week.
Hey.
And then just real quick, jumping over to the Raiders side, uh, Josh Jacobs is the big injury. Did not practice. Not expecting him to go. There is still potential that they make a switch at quarterback and no longer be Aiden O'Connell. But I have to imagine if they do switch, it goes to Brian Hoyer, which isn't great because I think Jimmy G is similar to a situation as Derek Carr, where there's more money guaranteed to him if he gets hurt. So they're going to keep him off the field like they did last year.
Go Raiders.
But my question is, I mean, they just lost a game 3-0 in the NFL. I know scoring is down, but it's not fun to watch. What are you doing with Devontae Adams? If you made the playoffs with Devontae Adams, I think is one thing, but we've seen, depending on how you manipulated your lineup, you might have been able to skid by because he's been not unplayable. He's been 7, 8, 16, 7, 4, 13. Like he's been playable, but not great numbers. Are you still rolling him out this week in the first round of the fantasy playoffs?
I am. I mean,
Okay.
because Chargers are actually a green matchup for wide receivers. And if they make the quarterback switch, I kind of feel better about him. Aiden O'Connell hasn't really been cutting it. If you go to Brian Hoyer, it's a veteran, might not be flashy, but like is going to target the number one weapon. If you go back to Jimmy Garoppolo, not going to be pretty, but is going to target the number one weapon. Like, I don't think it's going to be Garoppolo. I think it's going to be Hoyer, but I almost like it better. And in a green matchup, we'll revisit this in week 16 if you get that far against the red matchup in the Chiefs. But this week, we're rolling with Devontae Adams.
Cool. I like it too. And maybe, and I will be 100% honest, I got to be honest with you guys, Devontae Adams is top 5 favorite player of mine of all time. Like, no questions asked. But I would rather lose with Devontae Adams on in my roster than lose trying to get cute with doing something else. That's
He's
just
still
how I
wide
feel.
receiver, 21 on the year and half PPR. So still a wide receiver 2, or if you're in a 10-team league, a high-end flex. Can't really just bench that and be like, yeah, no. If you want to feel a little bit better, Cody, as we go out, my quarterback situation in a keeper league that I'm actually a number 1 seed. I started off the year with Anthony Richardson and Kirk Cousins, both hit the injured list. Ended up adding Geno Smith the week that he hurt his elbow and has been in and out. And my current quarterback is Jordan Love. So wish me luck to not have the injury hex on another quarterback.
Bro, get him off your team, please. Get him off your team. Monday night was bad enough. I don't know how I would feel with. We're not going to talk about that. And that's going to wrap up this bonus episode of the Couch GMs podcast where we broke down the Couch GMs World Cup. We hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you're following us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, X, all those good places at the Couch GMs. I'm Cody Roadcap. George Hurd joined me this week. Man, one of my best friends, I still blocked his name. But we'll be back and we'll be talking to you later this week.